So without further ado, I want to introduce our speakers tonight. I've asked them just to talk about one or two stories for 10 or 15 minutes. It's very informal. These are all current or former board members of the Fishermen's Association. And we're going to start with Kuki Macumber here to my immediate right, who has always great stories to tell. And then move on to Howie Gifford, and then to Jack Reynolds, who is our president of the Fishermen's Association. And if you have a story you want to tell at the end, you've been involved with a shipwreck, just raise your hand and we'll be happy to have you come up and share a story as well. And I would be remiss if I did not introduce Brad Luther, who's sitting in the front row here, who was sort of the foundation of all my research for the shipwreck exhibit. He has done a lot of discovery of shipwrecks. He was diver and had an active diving community here years ago. And the maps, the charts of shipwrecks are all done by Brad. So let's give a round to Brad for coming tonight and helping me get started on this project. So I'm going to turn it over to Kuki first. So just hold it down low.
Okay, do we need this? I think it's a lot clearer without that. I'd like to say that you mentioned Brad Luther. There was a time when he was the #1 scuba diver in New England. And he was the first man to go scuba diving in New Bedford Harbor to take cables and stuff off the propellers of different ships. Well, I got a list of shipwrecks that I know all about, and I'm willing to talk about them, but I'm going to have to cut that back because we'd be here till midnight if I did all of them. The first one I'd like to talk about is the Vineyard Sound lightship. I was in the Coast Guard Reserve. We patrolled Horseneck Beach every night. We had 2 men on the beach continuously. And we got a call from the COP of Boston and said, with this hurricane that's forecast, 1944, I want you to have men available to the commercial fleet in case they need help. So we put 4 men on Ted Hebden's porch, which is the last house down Main Road before you get to the boats at the wharves. And we didn't have too much to do except the Navy had a little boat in there that they claimed they were testing electronics with it. And it got pretty well beat up. And no Navy man ever came near it all through the hurricane. But about 2 o'clock in the morning, in the southeast, there were flares going high in the sky. Well, that meant there was a ship in trouble. But what could anyone possibly do about that? So we just ignored it. Well, yeah, because, you know, if the wind is blowing 125 miles an hour and there's nobody going to go out there and help those people who fired the flares up. So the next day, word got around that the Vineyard Sound lightship was missing. And then we got word from Woods Hole Coast Guard that during the night, you know, they only had AM radios in those days, and in a storm, about all you got was static. And we got word that during the night, the Vineyard Sound lightship had reported to the Coast Guard base in Woods Hole that our anchor is holding us. But the next day, the boat was gone. It wasn't anywhere to be found. And we realized that it was wartime and nothing like that could be in the media. The government didn't allow it. So no one knew anything about that ship being lost, except the local guys who realized it wasn't there. The word got out that during the night, when they received this message that the anchor is holding the ship, I think his name was Captain Hauser, was it, Brad?
Oh, no.
He was in charge of a cutter based in Woods Hole. He was going to go out and check each one of the lightships because the static was so bad they couldn't get some of them, any information from some of them. He cast off the lines that this is a good sized ship, and it got so bad he was really afraid that he was going to be a wreck, so he came back into Woods Hole and anchored up. Well, Brad Luther came to see me one day. This was quite a while after the hurricane. He said that he wanted to find the Vineyard Sound lightship. And so we built a sweep cable with doors. The doors pulled the cable out taut so that it covered, I don't know, 50, 75 feet. And he went back and forth with that, and he had to give up because all he was finding was rocks and, I guess, barrels and other things that was on the bottom. But eventually, he decided that Dr. Edgerton had invented a sight scanner which would certainly find the ship. And at the same time, there was a geodetic survey vessel working in Buzzards Bay. So Brad went right after him, and they, I think I'm right, they took him and his crew and the sight scanner and went out there and found the lightship. Brad said that the first thing he saw was a great big bronze quadrant, which was mounted on the top of the rudder post. So that ship went down, and all 11 men died in it. One man was on shore duty, so he was lucky he wasn't in there. But what made it sink? The Navy said that they had sent a hard hat diver down, and he went around the ship and couldn't find a single reason why it sank. Well, that diver has great big lead shoes on, and he's got a bronze ball sitting on his head, and I can imagine he just took a quick glance and said, well, I ain't gonna walk around this. Brad went down there, and up on the starboard side was the mushroom anchor, spare mushroom anchor laying there, with a half-moon hole right in the side of the ship. And the way that worked, the main anchor was a mushroom, and then they had a spare fastened up on deck. And that spare was held in place by rope. And when it came time to use it, all they had to do was chop the rope, and the mushroom anchor fell down. And by the way, those who don't know, a mushroom anchor has a shaft, and then it's got like a half a ball. So it forms a mushroom arrangement, sort of. And they work very well. Well, it appears that they deployed the anchor, and either there was a foul up in the chain that got caught or something, or the winch man put the brakes on. And that mushroom stopped at a certain point, and with the ship going like this, that mushroom swung around and just punched a hole right through the side of the ship. And that's why it went to the bottom. Also, those ships all had wooden bulkheads. And they weren't supposed to keep the water out of the rest of the ship. And so I don't think it took too long for the vineyard ship to go to the bottom. Have I got time for more?
Yep.
Okay. I got about 6 stories. Tanya's going to shoot me if I try to go over all those. I'm going to talk about the shipwreck that I was on. A good friend of mine, Jack Reese, bought this dragger that had hit the Benicia breakwater and punched a hole in the bow. And of course it sank right there. Well, it was raised and taken into New Bedford and patched up the hole. And Jack bought it, and he hired a marine mechanic to work on the engine and make sure it was ready to run. He had to clean the fuel tanks out because naturally some water got into the fuel tanks. That was a huge engine. I'd say it probably weighed a ton or more. And he called me one day and said, I'm getting ready to bring the boat to Westport. You want to go along? Sure. So I went over there in New Bedford and got on board the craft, and we started out. Well, all my life in boating, I've been so fussy about everything. Everybody's got a life jacket, everybody's got a survival suit, fire extinguishers are everywhere, you name it. Everything was safety conscious with my boats. We had nothing. We had no life jackets, no radio, no fire extinguisher. Well, Jack said, look, we only got to go from here to Westport.
Yeah.
We don't need anything on that. So we that's a slow turn engine. Maybe you've heard them. They go pong, 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 pong. We went down through New Bedford Harbor and around Clark's Point, and all of a sudden the wind started to blow. And there was no forecast for it. Right out of the southwest, it was really humming. Pretty soon, that boat, as big as it was still diving up and down. And it didn't run too long before the engine decided, we're not going to do this anymore. And it stopped running. So Billy Hart and I rushed down the engine room, and we figured it had to be a filter. So they happen to have filters on board, believe it or not. We put new filters on, and the engine started, and away we went. But we didn't go too far, and the same thing happened again. So this went on. By the way, the engine starts with compressed air. And the engine has a compressor that pumps up the tanks when it's running. When it's not running, those tanks are not getting any air. And you're supposed to have a compressor, an auxiliary compressor on board, but it was in bad shape. It wasn't worth saving, so Jack said, well, when it's in Westport, I'll put a new compressor on. Well, I don't know how many times we started that engine and ran a little distance and diving up and down, and finally we didn't have any air. There's no way we could start it again. So we had 2 winches on the boat. Each one had 100 fathoms of cable. And by luck, we had 2 kedge anchors on board. So we put over 1 kedge anchor, and that worked fine for a little bit, and then you realize that every time that bow went up, the anchor was coming back. So we put the other anchor over with the other cable, and same thing happened. The boat would lift up, and you could tell you moved back 10 or 15 feet. And the next wave went up, and you another 10 or 15 feet. We had to do something, so we had one of those old-time Coca-Cola things. It's like a big box, and you put ice and water in it, and you put the Cokes in it. Most of you probably have never seen one, but when I was a kid, that's what they used. So we put fuel oil in there and lit it. And we had the beautiful flames pouring out of that Coke machine. Meanwhile, Captain Bob Hendon knew what time we were supposed to be in Westport, and we weren't. So he came along the coastline looking for us. And by the way, it's almost completely dark by then. And he saw the flames, and he knew very well that was us. So he called the Coast Guard on Cutty Hunk and said, here's where they are. And evidently they're getting closer to the shore. So please pull that boat out of there. I can't believe it happened, but I believe the Coast Guard went out around Penakees Island and ran into those big seas, and the guy says, the guy in charge of the boat, we're not going to do this, let's go home. Coast Guard isn't supposed to do that, but they claim they went out and made a thorough search. Now these flames are really going up in the air. They claim they made a thorough search and couldn't find it. Well, that was that. So before long, we hit the first rock. And to go up onto a sea and then come down onto a rock is quite a jolt. I mean, your knees buckle and you just wonder if you're gonna go to pieces right there. Well, that was a well-built ship, and it took quite a beating in the rocks. This is, by the way, I didn't tell you where we were. This is Barney's Joy in Dartmouth, just over the line from Westport. And finally, Jack says, we gotta get off this boat. If that mast ever comes down, somebody could be dead. And I said, well, I'm not getting off this boat. When I was a young man, I was thrown overboard by a couple of guys. I didn't know how to swim. And I can still see that light up there today, and I'm thrashing away, but I can't get to the light. Finally, somebody realized what was going on. They dove in, and they hauled me out of the water. Since then, we don't go to the beach now because my wife isn't well, but we used to go to the beach and we'd walk into the deep water, and to get up to here, I'm okay. If it came up so it's almost to my chin, I start to go to pieces like that. So I'm not getting off this boat. And so Billy Hart went down the engine room, and he came back with a 5-gallon can, one of those metal 5-gallon cans. The oil came in. He said, wrap your arms around this and jump over.
Oh, jeez.
So I did. Well, I rode right on top of every wave. And those guys jumped over, and they were under more than they were on top of the wave. When it was all over, the next day I had a leather jacket and I had a salt line right just under my chin, right around there like that. And that 5-gallon can is still in my possession. So anyway, the boat was not damaged, so Jack figured we'd got to get it back in the water. So he hired a big crane to lift it, and a house mover was going to build a cradle under it and roll it out into the water. Well, the crane couldn't lift it up. They couldn't budge it. So they brought in another crane just like it, 2 big cranes, and all they picked up was the bow. They could not lift the stern because of the weight of that engine. So Jack said, okay, we'll wait till spring. This was late fall. Wait till spring and we'll do something about it. But meanwhile, during the winter, we had some big storms, and she came down onto some rocks and snapped the keel right in the middle. So the bones of that boat are over Barney's Joy now, where it went ashore.
So did you just float ashore with that?
What's that?
Did you just float ashore with that barrel?
I have to speak loud, but I can't, mostly so I can hear myself.
Did you just float ashore with that barrel?
Yeah, I put the,
And you floated ashore?
yeah,
Wow.
yeah. Well, the waves took me ashore.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, you know.
How long was the boat?
And we came ashore at Rodney's Joy, and it was dark, pitch dark, but we could see a light in the house. We started walking towards it. We fell into more mosquito ditches, and we couldn't see. But we finally got to the house, called my wife, she came and picked us up, and we get up. I don't want to swallow up any more of the show. I think I got 4 or 5 others, but have them for another day.
We might save them for. So we're gonna turn it over, I think, does it work without the mic? Am I loud enough too? Okay. So Howie is next up.
Well, I don't think my story is going to be quite that exciting. Lifesavers and wrecks usually connotate that there's damage, somebody is in trouble, and get lost in either heavy weather, bad weather, or fog. My story is not that way. It's going to more about embarrassment than it is about real danger. But it's part that belongs to all of us because it's talking about the United States government. The government, the Navy out of Newport, I believe it was Newport, at least down Long Island way, had a PC boat that's considered a patrol craft, probably between 100 and 180 feet. It was actually headed to Boston to a scrapyard. It was being towed by a Navy tug. And I guess the tug captain was probably not familiar with the Buzzards Bay because they were trying to tow the tug, you know, past Gooseberry down into the bay, planning to go through the canal, and they snapped the hawser. That was a full 3-inch hawser. So it took quite a bit of strain to break that hawser, and the tug didn't feel it safe to put somebody back aboard the tow. It was just too dangerous. And what we call the PC boat ended up right on the beach by the what we call the Charlton Estate, right behind the Noble. Went high and dry, and it didn't sink, but the bow rode way up in amongst the rocks. And it sat there for a while. Well, what do a bunch of high school kids do when they see a rock? We went down there evenings after dark and salvaged as much as we could off the boat to take home. And a good part of what we took home is sitting out around the corner by the sign of the lifesaver station. I had to bring a few of the artifacts with me so that it kind of adds material. And while you're looking at them, look at the material that they're made out of in those days. All the light sockets, heavy cast bronze, this beautiful equipment. When we sent Navy ships in World War II to battle, we sent them with the best equipment that you could possibly have. And you'll get that impression if you look at the material. Well, the Navy had to do something with the wreck that's on the beach. So when the weather quieted down, they sent another Navy tug, or a Navy, could have been the same one, I don't know. And they came over and they launched a small rowboat and towed a small line into the shore to the boat. Then they hauled the big line in and to hook up the 3-inch hawser to be able to pull the boat off the rocks. In the meantime, you got a big tug like that, and I'm sure they didn't have bow thrusters in those days. And the captain had a little problem in order to maintain station, so to speak. And sure enough, well, we probably all done it, but he got the rope in the wheel. So now he's got a boat on the rocks that needs towing, and he's got this beautiful tug and he's afraid to tell anybody he's going to rope in the wheel and he's helpless. So both of them, oh no, I missed something, they did tow it offshore, and then were moving the line to the bow, and the tug was then going to turn around and toward it. That's when he got the rope in the wheel. So what happened, you know where the town beach is, they had a tug and the PC boat high and dry in Westport Town Beach within a couple of hours. So it wasn't much they could do, so they left it there. So the Navy again had to get this out of town because there was newspaper articles being written about it. So something they weren't too proud of. So they brought another tug over, and they launched a small boat, took it in, and got a line on the tug that was aground, and they towed the tug off into the water. And they had just, I guess, slacked up on the line for some reason. The second tug got the tow line in the wheel.
Oh.
And now they had two tugs plus the PC boat on Horse Lake Beach. This was getting embarrassing. So if there's anybody here who remembers, you know, the boats of World War II, there was an LST. It was the largest landing barge that the Navy had. The bow doors opened up, double door, and then the ramp would come out. And then going down both sides of the LST with large lowering stairways where the soldiers could run down the stairways to get onto the beach, while the tanks could be unloading from the middle of the barge. Well, they took that LST and anchored it offshore, backed into the surf, and then a small boat took the cable into the first tug, and with that arrangement, they were able to get number one tug off. And then a little while later, I think it was the next day, they got the number two tug off. In the meantime, they had brought a good 200, 250-foot mothership and anchored it offshore. And that's where the rescue crew or the people working on it lived while they were doing all this. And it was lit up like a city all night long. And they would work for a while, then go out and get their lunch and come back. So it was their home away from home, so to speak. Well, they finally got both tugs, and then they finally had to take a line to the PC boat, and they got it off. And one of the tugs secured to this, the wreck, which was the PC boat, headed, I assume, headed to the same scrapyard that it was going to go to. But it started taking on water. Or I believe that, I'm not sure of that. But anyway, they got out by Gooseberry and they made the decision it wasn't going to make it to Boston. So they drove it hard on Gooseberry Island, or the Gooseberry Neck amongst the rocks. And it was used by the Navy for target practice. And then one of the hurricanes shortly after that washed it off the reef, and it's still sitting out here at the end of Gooseberry. Again, it was an ideal wreck that people knew about. There were some Westporters, I won't bring up their name, but they ended up getting the propeller and out of the engine out of it. So it made a little fodder for the boys in Westport. And that's the end of my story. Constable was sitting out here by the sign. If you want to
What year was that?
That was in the early 50s, because that was my last year of high school. I can remember that.
You see this graphic in this picture? Yeah. Well, what I'm going to talk about is not the engine of the cement barge, which I think most people here, if you do any fishing or sailing around here, you're pretty familiar with the cement barge. Well, this is a McAllister barge. And that barge went up on Old Cock. You can't see it, but the spindle, Old Cock spindle, which is a day marker, it's right on top of the rock, which bears it low tide. That barge is leaning right against it. It's got it partially bent over. Well, the barge went up here under the same conditions that this one ended up here. Was, you know, the tow line broke. It was pretty bad weather. Pretty good sea was on. And when it got up there, they couldn't get a line back on it to get it off and get it underway and heading up wherever they were heading up, like probably to Boston. And in the meantime, word got out that it was there, and it was a container barge, so it had, you know, truck bodies on it. You know, that was fairly new type of shipping back then. This was, well, it was a couple of years after the cement barge went up and after Sweet Pea and Bob Haynes took a lot of the metal off it. So it had to be probably in the mid to late 70s. And in the meantime, there was I really don't, see, I tried to Google and find out as much as I could about this. The only thing I could find was the ultimate court case afterwards. And I'll get into that after, I know it'll be a minute. Some guys from Falmouth, I think it was Hydro Dredge Company, young guys, boarded this, and they had like AR-15s, they were all armed. And they commandeered the barge and its contents, the cargo. And of course, the towing company and the people who had the, you know, the items in that, insurance companies, I'm sure, you know, they kind of didn't like the idea. So they went to court and they got an injunction against the guys that took it over doing anything with the cargo or the barge. And like a lot of things, injunctions take a while, you know, the judge has to go in and make his decisions. In the meantime, nothing could be done. So they were on the barge, these guys with the guns and not letting anybody near it. And they were serious, they weren't gonna let anybody near it. So the TV channels at the time got wind of this, and Channel 10, I don't remember back how they got a hold of me, but I was the only person down around, you know, down the point or anywhere that had a license to carry passengers for hire. So Channel 10 booked, you know, said, hey, can you take us out, can you get in close to that with your boat? And I said, yeah, I can get in there. It's right near the blister. The blister is another rock beside the old Cock Rock. And, you know, I fished around there a lot, and I knew anything but low tide, I was fine. And I only had a 29-foot, you know, Dyer boat, Dyer bass boat. So I brought them in. And when I first got, you know, all those guys marched out with their guns, I said, oh, we're gonna get shot. Because they didn't know who I was, or if I had a, you know, if they were reporters or what they were, they didn't know that. All they knew was I was coming in to tie up alongside their barge. And, because, you know, I didn't know how to get a hold of them. That was before the days of cell phones and all that. So I brought them in and I got close enough. They said, look, don't touch the boat, don't tie up on the boat. What are you doing here? And, you know, they weren't smiling when they said it. So I said, hey, you know, it's your gig, I'm just getting you out of here. So the guy announced that he was from Channel 10, and he showed his, whatever they show, you know, that thing that hangs around their neck. And they were reporters, and they would like to get an interview for the news. So then the guys were getting more, oh, he liked this, a little, you know, getting his story out there. So they let me come in, I tied up the, you know, the head common, the head Somalian or whatever, you know. He stayed on the barge, and the reporter stayed on my boat, and they had their confab, and there was a camera behind, you know, with microphones and all this stuff. So anyway, they got their report. I watched it on the news that night, and I always used to bring my dog out with me, and I have a golden retriever. And when I was watching the news that night, I watched that part of it, and then at the end, you know, they have the weather, and while they're superimposing the weather on the screen, you know, this is way back then, I looked and the boat was coming in right by Charlton's Dock, going around by Spindle Rock, and with my dog right at the rail, you know, the dog wouldn't go to the bathroom in the boat, so he could see shore, and he says, oh, this is good, I'm getting near home. So he was anxious, and that was on there. I got a hold of them, they gave me the tape for that. And I got it home somewhere, I don't know where it is, but it was in a tape, and I'm not even sure I can play it now. But anyway, what had happened, the beginning of the story was, in the meantime, while the judge was doing their dissertation or whatever they do, or thinking about it or whatever, we had another storm. I think that was right around hurricane season when you get big seas. It might not have been a big windstorm, but as you can see yesterday, you don't need a lot of wind. All you need is a big heave coming in from offshore. When it gets into shoal water like that, you know, it looks like the pipeline. And that boat got cleaned off. There wasn't a container left on it. In fact, when it was good enough weather to get out there, there wasn't even any sign of the boat except a couple of pieces of sheet steel and one main timber was still there. You could see it low tide. Everything else was gone, and there was one container over here on East Beach. It had opened up, but it was up on the beach and the contents were gone. And I found out that there was Scotch whiskey, Browning shotguns, Vespa motor scooters, and Seagull. I don't know if you've ever heard of a Seagull auxiliary outboard motor. Sailboats used to use them back then. They were very, you know, not very pretty. They were just functional. And you know, they're not cheap though. They're very dependable. And they're still out there. Oh yeah, there was a couple of containers of raw wool from Scotland. And I was lobstering back then too, and I can vouch for them. I don't know how long it was after that, we were hauling our gear out here, that our lobster pot walk would be wound up with this awful wool. It was much worse than anything I'd ever been tangled into before, because in a clump it's strong, you know, it's strong as rope, and you couldn't cut it off. It was difficult. It was awful. But that was it. That was, I was the only one that made money on that deal. The insurance company lost. The towing company lost. I'm the only one that made any money. It wasn't a lot. I think it was about $150 for the trip out and in, but you know, it was all right. I didn't mind it. And so, you know, being a fisherman all my life, I'm really not an expert on wrecks. I try to avoid them for obvious reasons. But I've had some good dealings with the Coast Guard. There was one time we were coming back from Nantucket in November. We were out fishing Nantucket shoals, and I was fishing out of Howardsport. I would bring my boat from here down to there in the fall and really winter, because of the bass fishing, the cod fishing was pretty good down there. Anyway, we were coming back one day, and we got up by Butler's Hole, which is right south of Monomoy Island and right near Handkerchief Shoals. And I felt the boat just didn't feel right. You know your boat, you had it a few years, it just didn't feel right. So, you know, I backed off on the throttle, and then I knew it didn't feel right because the boat kind of went heavy in the bow, went like this, and the motor stalled. I said, oh, this is not good. And right in front of the motor hatch, there was a smaller hatch before the companionway down in the forecastle. I whipped that open, and I looked in, and I was, you know, I had a battery back there, a battery box with 2 big batteries in it, and I could read the rating on the batteries, but through 6 inches of water. So I had 6 inches of water in there, and the reason the engine stalled was the water get into the belts, and the carburetor sucked in water, and it doesn't run good on water. So we were in trouble. So you know, naturally I did have a radio cue. That's about all, but I did have a radio. I called the Coast Guard, and we were on the east end of Nantucket Sound, and the Coast Guard Coast Guard Air Station was on what is it, Otis. And I swear, I didn't put that mic down, and I looked and I could see a helicopter coming. It was that quick. So they must have had the engine going out in the runway, and up they come, and they dropped a pump to us. And we were able to pump her out, and it was something stupid, which I don't want to go into. You know, it wasn't really my fault. Well, it wasn't my fault. I probably should have checked all the hose connections, even the one to the bilge pump, which was up under the deck. But the builder of the boat had put the bilge pump overflow below the deck and close to the water line, not below the water, but about that far above. So and that hose had come loose. So every wave that was sloshing against the side of the boat was coming in the boat. And you were in, needless to say, before I went out again, the bilge pump outlet was up. As unsightly as it might be up, right under the rail, up as far as you could go. And other than that, you know, I've had that a few other times. I've been towed in a couple of times when the Coast Guard used to tow you in now. Unless there's a danger of life and limb, they won't tow you. They'll call it a commercial tow. Which, you know, as long as you can get them, that's okay. But, you know, they were usually pretty good to me. In fact, one day I was probably no more than 3 or 4 miles south of here. The weather wasn't that bad, but there was nobody else out, and the engine quit. And I had to call, I used to always call Hampshire Station because they were close. They're not even there now, I don't believe, I don't know. And they sent a Coast Guard boat over, I think it was a 41-footer, and they towed me into the harbor. And I felt a little guilty. I said, geez, you know, sorry, he said, hey, we're just sitting over there in the what do they call them, you know, the Coast Guard station, chipping paint. This we get to ride around, go out in the water, and this is great. Don't feel bad. So, you know, that was my my dealings with the Coast Guard. They're usually pretty good. Now that they enforce fisheries laws, you know, sometimes I'm a little ambivalent on that, especially when they board me and they check all my lobsters. They even check the males to see if they got eggs. But anyway, I don't have anything more to say other than avoid shipwrecks.
He wants to make a quick comment, and we'll open it up for questions, or if anybody else has a story they want to tell, for a few more minutes before it gets really dark.
Okay, this has to do with accidents and wrecks. My boat was coming in one night, and I always know about where they are, and I called him on the radio one night, and he is busy talking to the Coast Guard. Oh my gosh, what's happened? Well, come to find out, a deep sea lobster boat was coming in, and the helmsman had to fall asleep because he ran right up on the No Man's Land Island. And there's plenty of water on both sides of it. There's no reason to do that. Another boat, the Westport boat, was coming in, and he missed the Westport river entrance by about a half a mile. He came right up onto West Beach, which is right over that direction. And of course, no way, he had to wait for a few days later when a tug came and hooked on and pulled it out. And then another one, and Brad has been very experienced with this one, that the Hildig Austin was a scalloper, and they had found a virgin bed of scallops near Block Island, and I guess they worked like mad to get as much as they could. They had a full hold of scallops, and they were coming in, and Brian said something about they hit Pig's Reef. I don't want to fight with him, but I think they hit the Chicken's Reef on. Now, they had radar, they had a sounding machine. There was no reason to have that to happen. But the helmsman fell asleep. So on my boat, we had what's called a watch alarm. And it's sitting right there beside the man at the wheel. And every 7 minutes, he's got to push a button. And if he goes beyond 7 minutes, a horn will drive the rest of the crew out of the boat looking for the helmsman to kill him. Because they've been working hard all day and they're trying to get some sleep. My point is, every fishing boat of any size should have one of those watch alarms because it would save an accident.
Thank you very much, everyone. Oh, go ahead.
I got a real short story about when the Coast Guard used to tow. Well, a friend of my sister in Provincetown was a fisherman, and they had bought a sailing boat, and they were out sailing, they ran into trouble, and the Coast Guard came out to tow them in. And the tow line got wrapped around the wheel of the Coast Guard cutter and pulled the sailboat down.
Oh my God.
That sounds familiar.
Yeah, there's a few of those stories, yeah.
Any other stories? Brad, you want
Are
to?
you familiar with the fact that you have a destroyer right off of the shore?
Yeah.
World War I four-stacker.
The Ford, they call it, it's a made by Henry Ford destroyer.
No, I don't think so. It was the
This,
Hershey.
the St. Clair?
Well, yes, that's what it was named. It was given by Franklin Roosevelt to England at the beginning of World War II. All of our four-stack destroyers that were in storage. And
Weren't they headed for Philadelphia to be scrapped?
no, there were 50, yes, but before, 50 of them went to England. And a lot of them found their way to Canada. This was one of the Canadian ones that we had loaned to England. And at the end of the war, yes, she was bought by the Boston Metals down in Delaware for scrapping. And she was struck out here by a freighter and sent to the bottom.
I'll bet a lot of people don't know that we've got a German submarine laying right out here.
The last vessel sunk in World War II.
Yeah.
Right.
And he knew enough and was told to go into the port with a black flag and give himself up? No. He sank a freighter that was ready to be junked. And he had one of those brand new torpedoes that goes up to propeller sound. And he sank it, of course, but no loss of life. And then we went out and sunk him.
Where is it?
It's off Block Island.
Yeah, it was the dive bomb that sunk it.
I have seen a lot of divers and heard a lot of divers that have been on it. And they asked me, why don't you come? And I said, I'm scared. Because those Germans were told that they have explosives rigged in the bilge. And they have to set it off, even if they have to stay there, to sink it so that we can't get our hands on the information. And I swear, there's one down there that somebody's going to touch or step on.
There's some guys who came to Westport and they were going to salvage the copper and valuable metals off the German submarine. And they did, they worked on it. And at that time we had Laura's Restaurant in Westport Point. Those guys came in and sold their metal and then put the money over Laura's Restaurant on the bar. I don't think they ever got rich at all.
Had a lot of fun though.
Yeah, I had a lot of fun.
And one thing Kilke didn't mention was the fact with the Vineyard Lightship. That was the first time, because I had worked with Edgerton before that in finding wrecks with this new project, the sonar.
Side scan and sonar.
Yeah. And when they had found that, and we brought in the big bell that was on the bow, it went worldwide. Even the Russians had a story on the new discovery of the side scan sonars.
Now you can have it on a kayak.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm very sorry that it is in New Bedford waterfront, going to pieces when it should have been down to the Coast Guard Academy. Because they don't have a memorial. Coast Guard does not have a memorial. And what a memorial that would be.
Well, great, thank you very much, Brad, for sharing, and to all of our students.